Thanks for staying with us here on The Real Story. Funding the government and coming to compromise over federal grants has been difficult in a divided Capitol Hill. But joining us now to talk about the bipartisan budget that has passed, and specifically education funding, U.S. Representative Joe Courtney. Joe, thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Emma.
So you've been serving in Congress since 2007. Not only has our world been going through a lot of rapid and unprecedented changes, but so has Congress. We're really seeing unprecedented division and partisan blockades on almost everything right now. So, we've seen it. You've experienced it. Tell me a little bit about what that's been like recently, especially in the budget process.
Sure. So, we, again, had a final conclusion, long awaited, for the fiscal year 2024 budget. Again, that fiscal year runs from October 1, 2023 to October 1, 2024. So it was about 5 months late. Wow. And that's as late as I've ever seen it. I mean, we've run overtime numerous Congresses in the past, but 5 months that late into the fiscal year is just very disruptive in terms of, you name it, defense, non-defense, trying to plan, agency budgets when, sure, when you just don't have a number is really difficult. So we made it. The good news is it was a bipartisan vote, yeah, and again, it was on the suspension calendar, which requires a 2/3 vote, and we made it, and the president signed it into law on March 23rd. So we have a fully funded government through October 1. We are immediately pivoting to the next year's budget because that's actually
no downtime there.
Absolutely not. So, but in terms of the education funding, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit here. I mean, Connecticut is a state that really, in my opinion, depends on investing in human capital. We don't have large commodity crops. We don't drill for oil or coal mine or anything like that. It's really about people. Right. And, that was one of the real difficult areas in terms of getting agreement to get to the conclusion. And I would basically describe it as we sort of kept the lights on, in terms of key programs, which again, in my district, but all across the state, are really, desperate to fully fund.
Absolutely. So, we saw the GOP messaging, especially in the House, was sort of targeting potentially a big swipe at the education budget on a federal level to try and teach a lesson because of disagreement over what they feel is happening inside the classroom. They've brought up lessons in things like evolution, Black history, the civil rights movement. It definitely is a contentious topic, even here in a state like Connecticut. And some parents have been struggling with that involvement. What's your response to that?
Well, first of all, you don't hit the system, with a battering ram, which is, cutting the Title I program which is the federal program for needy school districts. It's just been around since the 1960s by 80%. That doesn't help any parent in terms of, really making sure that their kids are going to have a good education. And again, Title I, which again, it helps particularly, poorer, more distressed areas, but right, there really is not a school district in Connecticut almost that doesn't, have Title I money. They also cut the impact aid program for military school districts, which is near and dear to the 2nd District, because we have Groton and Ledyard that are host communities for the submarine base, and they take on the burden gladly of educating the children of Navy active duty folks who are serving in that district. But going back to George Washington, we have recognized the federal government has an obligation to help those host communities. And again, that took a big hit in the budget that they put out. Special education, which is the biggest battle cry for every parent, is that program that provides individual assistance for children who suffer from disabilities. Again, woefully underfunded. Again, they were just zero funding that program. So for a small town like in Eastern Connecticut, who has a child who is, enters the school district, they have an obligation to provide services for that student, and it can get very expensive. And the federal government, which mandates this, has an obligation to really not just have level funding, but to do more. I mean, that was the promise that was made back in the 70s when it was passed. So again, this was really a tough sort of impasse, that we had to sort of fight our way through.
Right. And so with special education idea grants, that's going to be $14.2 billion, which is a 1.5% increase. Not a lot,
right,
but a little. But we know statistically the number of students needing special education support in Connecticut schools and nationwide has really increased exponentially. Connecticut is struggling when it comes to spending for special education. The funding they need has been mostly from state and local budgets and taxes. If a budget is about priorities, a lot of advocates say they feel like special ed isn't being prioritized. What's your role in that? What should we be doing?
So again, if you go back a couple of years, what we actually saw was some real growth in special ed funding,
right,
the prior Congress.
Right.
And again, we're blessed to have someone like Rosa DeLauro and my colleague Johanna Hayes, who were pushing for those increases that took place. Again, the gavel's changed hands, and we're back to sort of flat zero budgets. There was no question it should have been more than a 1.5 point increase in that budget, but it certainly, again, that gives you an idea of just how tough the sort of back and forth is.
Right.
We need a much larger infusion to live up to the federal mandate to help these communities. Special ed sometimes gets sort of demonized a little bit because of its burden, and I think it's really important to know that again, we've just got great professionals out there, folks who do wonders with children, and there's real success stories with it. But it definitely, there's more work to be done.
All right, and we started talking about that need and how things have been unprecedented in Congress and across the state and the world, and that this need is really unprecedented right now. Teachers say younger kids especially are sometimes coming to them 2-3 years developmentally behind post-pandemic, really shine a light on those issues and kind of made some of them even worse. So where do Head Start and Impact Aid come into this?
So again, Head Start is, again, another successful program. I think every serious study shows that when you get kids, particularly from disadvantaged homes, into programs that get their reading skills started earlier, okay, their socializing skills, they're just much more school ready, when the time comes. And your point about COVID, though, I think is really important, is that some of the COVID funding that did go into the school districts, which was actually a very good bipartisan support in the CARES Act,
right,
and then the ARPA bill, which Democrats supported, a lot of that money is now expiring. Right. So there was the headline this week was that the Hartford School District was looking at a $77 million deficit. And again, a lot of that is because ARPA money has been fading away.
It's run out now,
and that's, just going back to the beginning of our conversation, you just can't shortchange education in this country. And, we're seeing it in other areas with investment in training skills with the massive hiring that's going on down at the shipyard there. Again, the Department of Labor programs was also a bone of contention, the Workforce Investment Act, which is a way of trying to, again, skill up people in good programs, high quality, that are designed for the consumer, the employer.
Right.
And that also was another battle, was to get that WIOA funds up to the right level.
And with, WIOA, that's definitely been an accomplishment, but as you said, it was a battle. The GOP proposal was to cut it by 100%. So in the final budget now, you were able to maintain that funding, $885 million, no increase, but also no cuts. I harken back to what you said at the beginning, kind of just keeping the lights on here. Right. Same thing we saw for magnet school assistance, but these specialized targeted opportunities, really do set kids ahead in a lot of instances, and they give people these special skills. They seem more important now than ever, while we see a lot of different industries facing a workforce crisis. Do you think this funding is enough, or do you want to see an increase here?
I definitely want to see an increase, but I also want it to be spent smart.
Okay.
And one thing that, again, some of the schools in this state are doing is that they're creating new programs, not just in trade schools, but also in comprehensive high schools called career pathways,
right,
so that kids can get really connected to the local job markets that are okay there. And Westbrook High School got a national recognition for their career pathways program. Up in Thompson, Connecticut, way up in the other corner of the district, same thing. And we've got a great Secretary of Education who gets it, that, we really, because he's a product of trade schools, to really make sure that the curriculum for all students, really gives kids an opportunity to take advantage of the many job openings that are out there right now.
So you talked about, obviously, the big boost that a lot of schools got from that federal funding, from ARPA, from these grants that were created during the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you said, really big issue we've been seeing the industry have is they were reliant on those during that time. These issues still persist, but now that money is gone because it wasn't worked into the permanent budget. How do we make up that gap? The state has been trying to fill in certain ways, but from your perspective on a federal level, what can be done to sort of make up that gap there?
So, personally, I feel this is one of the issues that's on the ballot in November because, there, again, I think was a clear philosophical difference that these competing budget proposals sort of demonstrated that's there. But, what's interesting to me is that we're now seeing a lot more engagement by the employer community about the fact that, as you point out, we have an economy with millions of job openings. Right. There's a skills gap that is really a barrier that you have to sort of get through. And I think that there's a much more deeper understanding about the fact that investing in people through our public school systems, through these job training programs, is really good for prosperity in our country that's there. So, we are seeing a lot more support now for programs that were traditionally sort of viewed as, kind of fluffy or,
sure.
Not,
right.
Good return on investment. And there's no question right now that with the labor market that we have in this country, that education, job training is the way we solve those problems.
And a lot of teachers and staff and even some students are, here in the state of Connecticut are saying that they really still feel like they are in a state of emergency post-pandemic, even though, for most of us, the world has somewhat returned to normal at this point. They kind of say they still feel like they're in this emergency, and so they want that level of urgency with funding. How do you answer to them?
I think my visits to school districts shows that the COVID overhang is real, particularly right. in the area of behavioral health and mental health. And, again, Connecticut took some of that ARPA money and invested it in school districts for more school mental health professionals. And again, they're, I think, showing a lot of progress in terms of reducing the number of emergency admissions for, incidents that happen because of this type of condition. And being in the school means that, they're reducing the amount of lost class time for kids that's there. Again, this is an issue, though, as we've been talking about, you're going to hit a cliff in terms of the ability of some of these school districts to maintain that. And it's essential, if you're going to have, good school attendance and good successes for students that's there. So, that's why I love being on the education committee, and so does Johanna, and Rosa is very passionate about this because this is not just sort of feel-good stuff. It's really about trying to help families and help, again, our states and local communities succeed.
Education, always a huge topic, definitely an important conversation. Thank you so much for being here with us.
I really appreciate it.
Of course, and I'm sure we'll be watching. It's going to be an exciting and maybe an interesting battle as you get right back on to working on the next budget. But Representative Courtney, thank you so much for being here.
Great, thanks, Emma.
That does it for us here now on The Real Story. But if you want to watch these segments again, you can head to fox61.com or download the free Fox 61 News app and watch The Real Story every Sunday at 10 a.m. right here on Fox 61 or streaming on Fox 61 Plus. Have a great morning.